Hi, this is TheHande's and bringing you another Top 10 remake. Like I promised before, this is my Top 10 anime series list. Now, I always hate redoing a Top 10 because that always means that some of the things that were originally on the list are going to get dropped off, and that's definitely the case again. There are 3 new entries to this Top 10, and that means 3 shows had to be kicked off. And Burn Up XS was really the most expendable of the shows that were on the original list, so I didn't have too much trouble getting rid of that. But there were 2 other shows that I really liked that I'm going to give honorable mentions now before we move on to the list. First of all, School Rumble, one of my personal favorite crazy romantic comedy series. It's really funny and heavily recommended. The other one is Magical Shopping Arcade Abenobashi, and I feel really bad about this one because I gave Gainax such a hell of a time on the bottom 10 with 2 of their shows being on there. But this is one show by them that I really like, and the now defunct ADV Films also did an amazing dub for this series. So if you're watching it for the first time, it's recommended to watch it with the dub. There is also a manga that was made at the same time as this animated series, but the stories of those 2 are slightly different because they were done at the same time, and I think the series is better than the manga, although the manga is still worth reading because it's only 2 volumes. But now, let's get on with the list. At number 10, our first new entry is Sandy Bell. As the name suggests, this is a series about a girl named Sandy Bell who lives in Scotland, falls in love with Mark, who's the heir of a crumbling aristocrat family. They love each other, but then Mark's parents die. He's betrothed to this rich bitch called Kitty. He runs away from his own engagement party and goes out into the world in order to become a true artist. Sandy Bell's father dies from a heart attack, and she discovers that he's not really her father, but instead saved her as a baby from a sinking ship. So she goes to London to become a reporter, and if you haven't figured out already why I love this series so much, all of this happens only during the first half of the first season of this 2-season-long anime. It's just a really traumatic series, and for what seems to be a really girly-looking anime, I mean, this is one of those series that you definitely don't want to judge by the intro, which is so happy-cheery. A lot of traumatic stuff happens, but the characters are incredibly funny, and the series really just it just pushes along. The story doesn't drag its feet at any point. Now, except for maybe the second season where it becomes a bit of a filler fest at some points, but it's a really fun series, very competently made for an anime, for TV anime from the early 80s. It's a really fun series. I fell in love with it, immediately after watching it for the first time, and it's highly recommended. At number 9, Azumanga Daioh. Azumanga Daioh is still, in my view, the best slice of life comedy series out there. I mean, I have read several other comics made in the similar sort of strip style as Azumanga Daioh, and none have been as funny, in my view. Now, the animated series isn't an entirely faithful adaptation of the comic book, but it does a really good job of taking what was essentially a strip form, punchline format comic and turning it into sort of 20-minute episodes. Of course, the episodes themselves are segmented, so that helps the punchline structure somewhat. But there are certain parts of the comic book that I found really funny that unfortunately were not in the anime, but still, it's a very good transition from a comic strip to a full animated series. The characters are all extremely likable, and really, I just really love this series. Admittedly, it takes a couple of episodes for the series to really sort of get going before the comedy really becomes as crazy as in the comic book. But really, it's a great series and highly recommended. At number 8, Lovehina. Now, I did mention in the bottom 10 that I'm a fan of this series, and it's come up on the list a little bit. Really, I just think this is one of the funniest harem comedy series out there. I mean, it doesn't have a big romantic angle, definitely. It's more about the comedy, and it's really crazy. There's a lot of risque business going on as well. The series is about this geek called Keitaro who wants to go to Tokyo University because of a childhood promise he made to a girl he liked, but the girl moved away. So while he's trying to get in, he ends up as the landlord of this all-girls dormitory, and of course all kinds of crazy shit happens. He meets a girl who he thinks is the girl he made the childhood promise to, and that starts off really the series. It's definitely a series I watch more for the comedy than the romance angle, but it's still an extremely fun series, and at least, even though the animated series didn't have a proper conclusion, it at least the storyline was finally finished in Lovehina again, and as I said on the bottom 10, you don't need to see the Christmas or spring specials in order to get what's going on in that one. And number 7, another new entry, the Ouran High School Host Club, and I do have to admit that this is not the type of series that I thought I would be into, but it's again one of those series where you definitely can't judge the book by its covers. The series is about Haruhi, an honor student who gets into this extremely luxurious academy for rich people. She accidentally runs into the host club while looking for a place to read, breaks a valuable vase, and ends up working at the host club in order to pay for her debt. Yes, her debt, because most of the characters don't realize until the end of the first episode that she is in fact a girl. And this is where the comedy and hilarity in the series stems from. It also stems from the really crazy cast of characters, but also the series has a very good storyline, which is something that took me completely by surprise. And I have to say, this one has a really solid English dub by the Funimation company, and is highly recommended because of that. At number 6, Fruits Basket. This is a series about a girl named Toru Honda, who after her mother dies becomes orphaned, and because her relatives are all a bunch of whining assholes except for her grandfather, she ends up living in a tent, but ends up on the grounds of the Soma Boys, so she ends up living there after she accidentally discovers their secret, which is whenever they get hugged by a member of the opposite sex, they turn into animals. The premise of this series would sound like perfect material for a sort of comical series, but actually Fruits Basket is a very dark, very serious anime with very interesting, well-developed and written characters, and it's really a statement on the sort of Japanese value system. It is easily one of the best written anime series I've ever seen, but it does have a bit of a slow pace, so I have to warn you never to watch this series late at night, because you might fall asleep. At number 5, Dragon Ball Z! I started watching the Dragon Ball Z anime and reading the manga roughly around the same time, and therefore I was entirely engulfed into the whole mythos of the series. I mean, it is one of my favorite animes of all time. Whereas Dragon Ball was more of a martial arts comedy, slapstick adventure series, Dragon Ball Z took up the ante on the storyline, made it more serious, added some sci-fi elements to it. I mean, this series has it all. Evil aliens, galactic overlords, killer androids, time travel, and pink evil genies trying to destroy the world. What? I mean, Dragon Ball Z just has an incredibly memorable cast, some kick-ass action. The storyline takes over a long period of time, really the entire life of one of the main heroes. And even though it's a more darker and serious series than Dragon Ball, it still has that comedic edge to it, which I really like. Granted, it's a really long series, and some people may not enjoy it because of that. So if you have a problem with the series length, you should probably go check out Dragon Ball Z Kai, which is this sort of shortened series that's more true to the original comic. But for me, it's the original DBZ all the way. At number 4, Magic Knight Rayearth. This was one of the first anime series I watched from start to finish, and I still think one of the best. It starts off as a standard journey of 3 Tokyo high school girls to save a magical kingdom, but then at the end of the first season there's a massive plot twist, and for the second season the ante is upped in the storyline department, in the character interaction department, and in the drama. It's a series with a lot of great comedy and action, but again, the thing that still draws me to it is the storyline, and definitely in the second season, just how dark and serious it gets. I mean, let's face it, when you can put the words fantasy, action, adventure, and drama, and all of those accurately portray what this series is about, it's a pretty amazing series. Now admittedly, the first half of the series kind of comes off as your standard fantasy quest thing, but it's really there to set up for the plot twist at the end of the first season, and really to set up the story for the second season and the enhanced drama there. Nevertheless, this is still a series I love dearly. At number 3, Tenchi Muyo, or Tenchi Muyo Ryoki, whichever you prefer. To avoid confusion, I'm talking about the 3 6 to 7 episode OVA series here, and not the Tenchi Universe TV series or any of the standalone movies and whatnot. For me, Tenchi Muyo is easily the best harem comedy out there, because despite that name harem comedy, it doesn't really have anything to do with romantic angles, and even if it does, it's not inherently obvious, which I think is the problem of most harem comedies. What's great about it is that this series is clearly built around these stints of 6 to 7 episodes, and because of that, it always feels that the story is moving along at a brisk pace. In the first season, something new is always happening in each episode, and the third series also ups the drama quite a bit. The second series is definitely where it feels more like your traditional comedy anime, and there's a lot more one-off episodes and not really a strong narrative core, but the second season has some of my favorite episodes of the entire series, which is why I still love it. And like I mentioned before, one of my favorite things about this series is the lead hero, Tenchi, who's just your average guy who really doesn't want anything to do with any of these extraterrestrial women coming in and basically making his life crazy. But he's also very noble and always does his best to help out when the situation calls for it. At number 2, Bacano, the last new entry on this list, and I have to say, one of the most impressive animes I've ever seen. Now, like a lot of the other anime on this list, this one is not based on a comic book, but instead a series of light novels that is still going on, and that's why I wish that there's going to be a sequel continuation to this storyline at some point. What's great about Bacano is the fact that it relies on non-linear storytelling and does it really, really well. Besides that, the cast is really memorable with a lot of great characters, and really the series manages to recreate the 1930s mobster atmosphere really faithfully. It's a really great series, both atmospherically. It's dark, a little violent at times, but it's still great stuff. I mean, come on, how could you not love a series with a character called Jacuzzi Splot? And finally, number 1, Ginga Nagarebushigin, Silverfang. This is a series about an Akita Inu pup, born with a silver coat of fur, whose father is killed by a crazy bear called Akakabuto. When he grows up, he joins a group of dogs that have been abandoned by their owners and have made the valley their home. But the bears are trying to take over, so they take off on a journey to collect more dogs to fight off the bears and save the valley from the terror of Akakabuto. This is just an amazing, crazy, action-packed series with a lot of gore, a lot of action, but also a lot of heartfelt comedy, and it's one of my favorite dramatic series of all time. I mean, it's a little cheesy at some points, but that's what makes it so great. Just to point out how great this series is in comparison to its god-awful continuation, Ginga Densetsu Weed, the first third of the series is actually told from the perspective of the humans living in the valley. The second leg of the series is really the journey and all the crazy stuff that happens there, and finally the finale just ups the ante and is one of the most epic finishes to any anime I've ever seen. And that wraps up this list. I'm Hanu the Hande Mäkinen. See you on the next one.